He believed fate had closed all doors, until he encountered the woman who left without explanation, at the moment he needed her most. The emergency room transformed into a stage of memories and repressed emotions. A story of pain, reunions, and second chances. Get ready, because this romance will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. The emergency room door burst open. Ryan entered carrying Matthew, burning with fever in his arms, the small 6-year-old body weighing like an anchor against his chest. The air conditioning cut across his face like a cold blade, contrasting with the heat emanating from his son. 103.8, he lied, while the thermometer display in his pocket showed 104.5 degrees. He needed urgent help, not lectures about negligence or delays in seeking medical attention. The receptionist pushed the form across the counter with the indifference of someone who sees pain every day. With trembling hands, Ryan scribbled basic information, leaving blank spaces where the mother's name should appear. When the received stamp finally hit the paper, a clear and authoritative voice cut through the murmur of the waiting room. Pediatric priority. Take him to room 3. Ryan looked up, confused about being called before others. That's when the world around him seemed to freeze. The white coat, the ID badge hanging, the dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. He would recognize those features anywhere, even after 7 years. The world shrank until it only contained the space between them. You? The word escaped before he could contain it. She hesitated too, a second longer than a doctor normally would. Then, she resumed the professional demeanor of someone who has seen many scares in that hospital. Let's focus on the patient first, replied Emma, indicating the stretcher where he should place Matthew. In the examination room, Emma transformed completely. Her movements were precise, her voice controlled as she auscultated the boy's chest, checked for neck stiffness, asked about associated symptoms. The stethoscope slid over the hot skin with the delicacy of someone who knows the pathways of pain. 104.5 isn't common, but it happens in children this age. We'll medicate, hydrate, and observe. Emma now spoke without looking directly at Ryan. If the fever doesn't subside, or if his behavior worsens, we'll expand the investigation. Blood work and urinalysis now. CT scan only if there's neurological alteration, understood? Ryan nodded, intimidated by the professional efficiency of the woman he once knew so intimately. Matthew, weakened by fever, maintained a lost gaze until the nurse entered with the antipyretic. He whimpered when feeling the needle, then gasped, overcome by exhaustion. The silence that settled between the adults brought back the weight of the years that separated them. How long? Emma asked, pretending to check her watch without actually looking at the time. Long enough to forget how to finish a sentence without it hurting, Ryan answered, observing how she avoided his gaze. And him? Emma's chin indicated the sleeping boy, my son. He paused. Our silence materialized. Emma took a deep breath, containing something that almost came to the surface. Her face betrayed a fleeting emotion before returning to the professional mask. I'll monitor him closely. I'll return in 15 minutes. Alone with Matthew in the observation room, Ryan felt the weight of coincidences. How in a city with millions of inhabitants had he ended up exactly under Emma's care? The universe had a peculiar sense of humor, bringing them together at the moment he was most vulnerable. Worried about his son, not having slept for 2 nights, carrying the fear every parent feels when a fever doesn't break. He observed the sweat on Matthew's forehead beginning to diminish, the once scalding skin now merely warm. The white walls of the hospital reflected a cold and impersonal light, but inside him everything was memory too hot. The last argument, doors slamming, the unexplained absence that followed. Emma had disappeared without leaving an address, and life continued as best it could. He learned soup recipes for sick days, memorized pediatric medication dosages, knew the weight of a sleeping body on a tired shoulder. There was no space left for unanswered questions. Until now. Emma returned with preliminary results in hand, posture erect as if carrying not just the chart, but an invisible armor. Blood work suggests a viral condition. Clean urine. No neurological alarm signs. We'll maintain the antipyretic protocol, oral hydration, observation, and reassessment in an hour. Will he be all right? Ryan's voice came out more vulnerable than intended. All indications suggest yes. And for the first time since their reunion, she maintained eye contact. There was professional dedication there, but also the remnant of an abyss that had separated them years ago. The pager in her pocket vibrated, interrupting the moment. A nurse appeared at the door. Dr. Emma, incident in room 5. Child with seizure. Emma looked at Matthew, then at Ryan, and made a decision not found in medical protocols. I'll be back. I'm not leaving this shift until I see that fever completely subside. When Emma left, Ryan adjusted the thin blanket over Matthew, caressed his son's damp hair, and rested his forehead on the small, warm hand. It's all right, champ. Dad's here, he whispered, feeling the irony of the words. He was here, yes, but still didn't understand why his son's mother had chosen not to be. 2 hours passed. Matthew's fever decreased to 100.6 degrees. The boy was beginning to respond better, his breathing calmer. Ryan was almost dozing in the uncomfortable chair when Emma reappeared with a small tray, a glass of water, an apple juice box, and a colorful dinosaur sticker. She smiled without fanfare, like someone not proud of their own gesture. Hey there, champ. Let's take small sips, okay? Her voice was softer now, different from the professional tone before. Matthew opened his eyes, observing with curiosity the white coat and the stethoscope hanging around her neck. Do you fix people? He asked, with the simplicity that only children possess. I try. Emma placed the dinosaur sticker on the back of his hand. And you help me by drinking this juice little by little. The pager vibrated again in her pocket. This time, Emma silenced it without checking. He can be discharged later if he continues to progress well. Analgesic if there's pain, antipyretic if the fever returns, plenty of fluids, and rest. Her voice returned to the professional tone. Return immediately if he becomes very drowsy, projectile vomits, shows neck stiffness, headache worsens, or doesn't respond to medication within an hour. Right. Ryan nodded, but made no move to leave. After a long silence, he risked, And us? What happens now? Emma rested her palms on the metal counter, her knuckles whitening slightly. In here, I'm a doctor. Out there, I'm a lot of things you once knew. Out there, a piece of the story was missing. You were missing too, Ryan. He bit back the response that threatened to escape. Matthew breathed more deeply, as if feeling the tension and wanting to bring the two adults back to the present reality. The conversation was interrupted by an elegant figure appearing at the door. Impeccable dark suit. Leather briefcase, practiced smile without showing teeth. Dr. Parker, the administration requested that I follow this case. Sensitive issues. The man introduced himself as the hospital's legal representative, using terms like conflict of interest, informed consent, and professional boundaries. Emma took a deep breath, visibly containing her irritation. The patient is properly attended to. The legal guardian has signed all necessary forms. There's no conflict in emergency care. The man in the suit assessed the situation, retreating 2 strategic steps, just ensuring everything is civilized. When he walked away, Ryan and Emma exchanged a look and laughed without humor. They're afraid of real stories, she commented, quietly. Real stories drip outside the medical charts, he returned, in a flash of the complicity they once shared. Matthew fell asleep again, this time with a more serene expression. Ryan and Emma went out into the hallway, where blue plastic chairs held conversations that didn't fit at a hospital bedside. I looked for you, he said, in a low voice. I looked until I understood that searching is just a way of not admitting it's over. I left before I learned how to stay. Emma faced the light vinyl floor, as if there she might find the right words. There was a shift that never ended, a body that no longer seemed mine, a house that constantly reminded me of everything I didn't know how to do. You could have said that, and you could have asked differently. He paused, choosing the verb carefully, afraid to hear the answer. Me too. Emma ran her thumb over the silicone ring that held her badge, an old nervous gesture that said more than any verbal explanation could say. 2 hours later, Matthew's fever had disappeared. Discharge came with paperwork, stamps, and detailed instructions. Ryan picked up his son, already regaining energy. Thank you. doctor. The formal term doctor seemed to fit where you had once made too much noise. I would like to... Emma searched for a word that would fit both on the badge and in their shared history. Follow the case. As a family friend. For now. For now is dangerous. More dangerous is pretending nothing happened. What happened is that you came back. Ryan adjusted the backpack on his shoulder, Matthew weighing softly against his chest. And I still don't know what to do with that. The rain that had brought them to the hospital seemed completely different when they left. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility. At home, Matthew slept again, the dinosaur sticker shining colorfully on the back of his small hand. Ryan prepared a light soup, checked messages on his phone, opened and closed empty conversations with friends who wouldn't understand the storm he had just weathered. His phone vibrated with a new message. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., I make house calls when there's been a recent high fever. Medical protocol. There was a hidden smile in the word protocol, as if they both knew that no hospital manual recommended what they were doing. He responded with a simple okay that carried the weight of 7 years of unasked questions. The next day, Emma arrived punctually, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, hair loose falling over her shoulders. So different from the contained doctor at the hospital. She brought a small bag with a thermometer, stethoscope, and an illustrated book about dinosaurs. How's the patient? She asked, too formal for the casual environment. Better. Ryan indicated the living room with a gesture. Matthew, who was playing on the rug, ran to the kitchen and stopped at the door, suddenly shy. I brought reinforcements. Emma held up the colorful book. Dinosaurs that don't require night shifts. In the days that followed, a new routine began to form. Emma appeared 3 times a week, always with some medical excuse that became increasingly unnecessary. They assembled puzzles on the living room floor, read stories, drew imaginary creatures. She was patient with Matthew, let him make mistakes, celebrated his successes, calmly explained the whys. Ryan observed from a distance, pretending to occupy himself with unnecessary household tasks, amazed to see 2 hands rediscover a simple gesture that had been lost. Gentleness. On a Sunday afternoon, while Matthew napped on the sofa after a busy morning at the park, the difficult words returned. Where were you all this time? Ryan finally asked. In a place where everyone applauds rescues and no one sees who leaves through the back door. Emma leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed as if protecting her own heart. I had to completely lose myself to understand that saving others doesn't cure one's own absence. And now? Now I know you can't heal from shift to shift. That there are people who simply can't be left behind, outsourced for time to resolve. Her eyes found Matthew's, asleep. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can only promise I won't run away when it hurts. Do you want to come back into our lives? I want to learn to return without invading. I want to be present without suffocating. With boundaries, with truth, with professional help if necessary. Emma shrugged, a strangely vulnerable gesture. The hospital administration will complicate things. My mother will interfere. Someone in a suit will probably reappear with forms and warnings. I have my own personal suits too, Ryan laughed without humor. Internal voices insisting that a knot that came undone once will come undone again. We can start with what's incontestable. Him. Her gaze went to the sofa where Matthew slept. Then we'll talk about us. If there's room, the doorbell interrupted the moment. Mrs. Jenkins, the 60-year-old neighbor who had practically adopted Ryan and Matthew when they moved into the building, entered carrying a homemade cake. Inevitably, she learned about the fever, the hospital, the doctor. With the lack of filter that only elderly ladies can have, she launched, "Well, and you two? How do you know each other?" Ryan and Emma laughed, that uncomfortable laugh that points to an abyss and tries to throw flowers around it. In the following weeks, the routine gained more defined contours, good morning messages asking about symptoms that no longer existed, smiley thermometer stickers, an afternoon in the park with too many coats and fewer worries, Matthew calling Emma doctor with the growing intimacy of someone who already intuits who she really is. Emma went to school, met the teacher, signed the message book as health guardian, explained warning signs to the principal. She made a difference without making a fuss. Not everything was simple. Emma's mother appeared without warning one Saturday, measured the apartment with critical eyes, evaluated the embarrassed silence with an invisible ruler of judgments. "Are you going to make this official?" she asked, like someone collecting an overdue tax. "We're prioritizing Matthew's well-being," Emma replied, without the resentment that used to permeate her interactions with her mother. The hospital's legal representative also reappeared, demanding documentation, clear boundaries, defined intervals between personal and professional. He received a meticulous schedule, well-delineated responsibilities, agreed times, preserved routines. Ryan proposed family therapy. Emma promptly agreed. Matthew's teacher suggested gradual meetings, first short, then progressively longer. The regular pediatrician reviewed not just the fever, but everything that episode had triggered. On a Thursday night, 3 months after the reunion at the hospital, Matthew woke up crying. Nightmare. Ryan got up immediately. When he was about to turn off the light in the hallway, the small, frightened voice asked, "Is the doctor staying tonight too?" Ryan looked at Emma, who had fallen asleep on the sofa after a dinner that extended too long. She nodded without hesitation, entered the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and told an improvised story about brave dinosaurs facing imaginary monsters. Her hand rested on Matthew's until the small body completely relaxed. Fear, when shared, visibly diminished. The following Saturday, they went to the city's Central Park. Matthew ran to the slide, returned with hurried steps, just to confirm that the 2 adults were still sitting on the same bench. "I see you," Emma waved. "You can go play." "He always does that," Ryan commented, watching his son return to the playground. "Checks the world and comes back to make sure." "Like us," she replied, without thinking. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the grass. The light filtered through the tree leaves drew golden patterns on Matthew's flushed cheeks. "I don't know if we still know how to be a couple," Ryan confessed. "Honest. I don't know if we know how not to be," Emma replied, sharing the same uncomfortable truth. "But I want to learn to be a mother. I want to learn to be an adult by your side, even if we discover that by your side has a different shape than we imagined before. Do we write from the beginning? We write from where it hurt, to heal with some meaning." On the way home, Matthew fell asleep in the back seat, cheek pressed against the window, exhausted after hours running through the park. They stopped in front of the building. With the engine off, the silence seemed to amplify the sound of breaths and racing hearts. "I won't disappear anymore," Emma said, before Ryan could formulate any question. "If I falter, I'll warn you. If I get tired, I'll tell you. If I make mistakes, I'll apologize. But I won't run. And I won't pretend anymore that I don't need help." Ryan looked in the rearview mirror, saw the dinosaur sticker still stuck on Matthew's hand, surprisingly resilient after months. "Or that you can love alone." Emma extended her hand over the center console. Ryan intertwined his fingers with hers. It wasn't a romantic movie scene. There was no emotional soundtrack, no promises of eternal perfection. There was just a boy asleep in the back seat, a parked car, and 2 people different from those who separated years ago. When they entered the apartment, the place smelled like home, a mixture of children's books, drawings hanging on the refrigerator and plants beginning to bloom in the windows. Emma hung her coat on the newly installed coat rack that now had a hook with her name, went to the bedroom, and adjusted Matthew's blanket with the care of someone who has learned to recognize the subtle signs of children's sleep. Ryan observed from the door, witnessing the moment. Matthew sighed, turned to his side, as if unconsciously approving the new arrangement. "And now?" asked Ryan when they returned to the living room. "Now we arrange regular visits on Mondays and Thursdays. Periodic consultations with the pediatrician, school meetings, family therapy on Saturday mornings." Emma smiled slightly. "And a space for us to talk, just the 2 of us, without the pressure of shifts or emergencies." Ryan served 2 cups of tea. They sat on the sofa, closer than they used to sit. The wall clock marked any hour that no longer mattered so much. Outside, the city continued its frantic rhythm. Inside, 3 lives were beginning again in the time they needed, with fevers that subside, with boundaries that protect, with second chances that don't promise perfect endings. just continuous presence. Matthew appeared at the living room door, disheveled hair, dragging his favorite blanket across the floor. "Are you two here?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. "We are," they answered in unison. "Then I can sleep a little more." He returned to the room without fear. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan and Emma did too. 6 months after the reunion at the hospital, life had found a new rhythm. Emma reduced her shifts, transferred to the elective pediatrics department, and began dividing her time between the hospital and the private clinic she opened in the neighborhood. Ryan reorganized his schedule at the publishing house where he worked, prioritizing working from home to be more present in the family routine. Matthew flourished with the newly gained stability. His grades improved. He made new friends, developed a passionate interest in science. On a Sunday afternoon, while preparing a late lunch, Emma was cutting vegetables at the kitchen counter when she suddenly stopped. "Knife suspended in the air, what is it?" asked Ryan, noticing her distant expression. "I remembered the day I ran away." She put down the knife. "It was a Sunday like this. You were sleeping. Matthew, a 3-month-old baby, was also sleeping. I looked at you both and felt such panic that I couldn't breathe." Ryan leaned against the refrigerator, giving her space to continue. "I had just lost a patient in pediatrics. A 4-year-old girl. We did everything right, followed all protocols, but she died anyway." Emma took a deep breath. "I came home and realized I couldn't look at Matthew without imagining all the ways he could end, as if being a doctor had made me incapable of being a mother." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were so certain I would be perfect." She smiled without joy, the gleam in your eyes when you saw me with him, as if I knew exactly what to do. And I knew nothing. I was improvising, terrified, suffering from postpartum depression that I didn't recognize because doctors don't get sick, right? Ryan took a step toward her, hesitant. "I didn't know anything either. I just pretended better. After I left, each day made it harder to come back. The shame grew until it became a wall." Emma looked out the window to the condominium playground where Matthew played with other children. "I called your mother in secret to know if you were okay. She hated me, but she gave me news. My mother never told me. I asked her not to tell. I said I was getting treatment, that I would return when I was whole. But time kept passing, and courage didn't come." Ryan touched her shoulder lightly. "Until the hospital emergency. Until fate conspired." Emma smiled, this time with some genuine light. "When I saw you coming through that door, it was as if time had just been a parenthesis. As if I could finally breathe again, even though I was terrified." Matthew came running in, interrupting the conversation, knees dirty with earth, eyes bright with adventure. "Doctor, look what I found." In his small hands, a blue bird feather. Could it be from a dinosaur? Emma knelt down to be at his height, examining the feather with scientific seriousness. Dinosaurs transformed into birds over millions of years, so technically, yes. It's a feather from a distant relative of dinosaurs. The boy's face lit up with the discovery. Ryan observed them, feeling a sharp pang of emotion. The doctor and the son, sharing knowledge and wonder, filling the void that years of absence had created. The first time Matthew called Emma Mum happened without planning or great ceremony. It was during a routine consultation with the family psychologist, when the therapist asked who the boy considered his family. "My dad, my doctor mom, Grandma Helen, and Rex, who's my fish." The room fell silent. Emma froze, teary eyes fixed on some point on the wall. Ryan felt his heart race, uncertain how to react. The psychologist, an experienced professional, smiled gently. "Dr. Mom is an interesting name. Could you tell me more about that?" Matthew shrugged, with the naturalness of children. "She takes care of me when I'm sick, like a doctor. And she teaches me things, makes food, tells stories at bedtime, like a mom. So she's both things." That night, after Matthew fell asleep, Emma cried silently on the balcony, while Ryan held her without words. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, like rain after a long drought. "I don't deserve it," she whispered against his chest. "Deserving isn't the point," Ryan replied, stroking her hair. "His love is a gift, not a prize for perfect behavior. Between scalpels and silences, the past began to pulse again. The reunion that seemed impossible brought unanswered questions and feelings that never died. An interrupted love, a child in the middle, and the chance to rewrite their own story. You'll feel every emotion with them. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story that will mark you. The official transition happened gradually. Emma began spending more nights in the apartment, until eventually most of her clothes and books had migrated there. When her own house became just a space for sporadic visits, she made the decision to sell it. "Are you sure?" asked Ryan, when she mentioned the subject. "That place holds the version of me that ran away." Emma leafed through real estate catalogs. "I prefer to build the version that stayed." Ryan's apartment, previously functional and plain, gained touches that revealed Emma's growing presence. Plants on the windowsills, medical books on the shelves, a comfortable armchair in Matthew's room for bedtime stories. Ryan himself changed. His shoulders seemed less tense. His laughter came more easily. His beard was always trimmed, small signs of someone who began to care about himself again. New habits formed. Sunday breakfast with animal-shaped pancakes. Study sessions where Emma patiently explained scientific concepts that fascinated Matthew. Movie nights where the three squeezed onto the sofa, commenting and laughing at the same scenes. The family that had broken was not reconstructing, but building something new on the foundations of what had been lost. The hospital's legal representative, now less intimidating and more resigned, appeared one last time with official documents. The institution acknowledges the previous and current relationship between Dr. Parker and the guardian of minor Matthew Wilson, he recited monotonously. "We only request that formal medical consultations be conducted by other team professionals to avoid conflicts of interest." Emma signed the papers without hesitation. "I completely agree. I prefer to be just a mother in this story." The ceremony was small and informal. Only close family members and some friends gathered in the city's botanical garden. Matthew, now 7 years old, carried the rings in a small wooden box, proud of his responsibility as guardian of the rings, a term he himself had invented after a fantasy film marathon. Emma wore a simple light blue silk dress, without a veil or elaborate bouquet, just a single flower pinned in her loose hair. Ryan, in a grey suit that Emma had chosen, seemed simultaneously nervous and at peace, like someone who finally finds the exact place where they should be. "I promise not to run when fear comes," Emma said, her words replacing traditional vows. "I promise to stay and face things together. I promise to remember that healing others begins with healing ourselves." "I promise not to presume I know all the answers," Ryan responded, holding her hands firmly. "I promise to ask, listen, and understand. I promise to build a house with open doors where silences don't need to hurt." When they exchanged rings, Matthew pulled at the hem of Emma's dress. "Can I call you just Mom now?" Without doctor in front? The question, unexpected and sincere, provoked emotional laughter among the guests. Emma bent down until she was at eye level with the boy. "You can call me whatever your heart tells you," she replied, her voice breaking, "and I'll always answer." The first year of marriage brought challenges that tested the promises made in the garden. Emma's mother became seriously ill, requiring constant care. The hospital offered Emma a promotion that would demand more working hours. Matthew faced adaptation difficulties at the new school after moving to a larger house. On a particularly difficult night, after a 36-hour shift caring for her mother at the hospital, Emma arrived home exhausted. She found Ryan asleep in the armchair in Matthew's room, a storybook fallen in his lap, the boy wrapped in blankets. For an instant, the familiar panic threatened to return. The suffocating sensation of responsibility, the fear of not being enough, the impulse to flee. This time, however, she took a deep breath and entered the room. She sat on the floor beside the armchair, resting her head against Ryan's knee. He awakened slowly, confused eyes meeting hers. "I came back," she whispered. "I'm tired, sad, worried about my mother. But I came back." Ryan touched her face with gentle fingers. "We're here. I know. That's why I came back." Emma's mother passed away the following spring. The funeral was small, marked by the uncomfortable silence of relatives who never fully understood the daughter's choices. At the cemetery, as people dispersed after the ceremony, Emma remained motionless before the freshly closed grave. She never enjoyed, she murmured to Ryan, who held her hand. Always saving life for later, for when everything would be perfect. Later never came. Matthew approached, carrying a small, smooth stone he had found on the path. "Can I leave this for Grandma?" he asked, uncertain about mourning protocols. "Of course you can." Emma smiled through tears. "She was stern with me," the boy commented, carefully placing the stone on the tombstone. "She didn't know how to love without controlling," Emma explained, putting her arm around her son's shoulders. "Sometimes people get so worried about doing everything right that they forget to simply do." On the way back home, they stopped at an ice cream parlor. Sitting on the plaza bench, licking cones that melted quickly under the sun, they formed a picture of extraordinary normality. An ordinary family living an ordinary moment after a not-so-ordinary day. "I think I understand my mother better now," Emma reflected. Watching Matthew run after pigeons, she was afraid too. She just didn't know how to transform fear into something else. Ryan intertwined his fingers with hers. "And you? What did you transform yours into?" Emma contemplated the question for a moment, observing her son, who was now returning running, face illuminated by the simple adventure of scaring pigeons, into courage to return, into permission to be imperfect. The second anniversary of the reunion at the hospital arrived on an ordinary Thursday. Ryan had prepared a surprise, a photo album documenting not just the happy moments of the last 2 years, but also the difficult ones. Emma asleep from exhaustion on the sofa after a long shift. Matthew with fever being medicated by both. The chaotic move to the new house. Emma's mother's funeral. The first serious discussion they had after the wedding, accidentally captured while the camera was on. "Why keep the bad moments?" Emma asked, leafing through the album with an intrigued expression. "Because they're part of the story. And because they show we came back, even when it hurt." That night, after Matthew fell asleep, they sat on the porch of the new house. The sky was exceptionally clear, dotted with stars rarely seen in the polluted city. "Did you know that some of these stars we're seeing don't exist anymore?" Emma commented, head resting on Ryan's shoulder. "The light traveled so long through space that, when it reaches us, its source may have already been extinguished." Like certain memories, Ryan reflected. "We continue to see the brilliance of something that has already transformed into something else." "Do you still see the brilliance of the Emma you knew before?" "Sometimes, but I prefer the light of the one who's here now, more real, even when less bright." Emma smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "When I was away, I used to look at the sky and think that at least we were under the same stars. It was a pathetic comfort, but it kept me connected somehow. And now? Now I know that even dead stars have purpose. Their light continues traveling, continues arriving, continues illuminating. Time, that invisible architect, was shaping the family that emerged from the ashes of a hospital encounter." Matthew grew with the confidence of someone who always had a safe harbor, even knowing of the storm that almost sank it. Emma developed her pediatric clinic with the sensitivity of someone who knows the fragility of families from within. Ryan published his first children's book, illustrated by a friend, telling the metaphorical story of Asmal Dinosaur, who loses his mother and finds her again after a long journey. 3 years after the wedding, the hospital's legal representative, now almost a family friend, appeared at the door of Emma's clinic with an unexpected proposal. "The hospital is creating a psychological support department for first-time mothers. We thought of you as coordinator." "Why me? I'm the living example of who failed at that." "Exactly because of that. You understand the process from the inside. You know where the cracks are." Emma brought the proposal home, discussed it with Ryan during dinner, while Matthew observed them with the perceptive curiosity of his 9 years. "You should accept," the boy opined, surprising the adults. "So other children won't be without their mom for a long time like I was." The comment, direct and without accusation, left the table silent. Emma swallowed hard, unable to respond immediately. Ryan extended his hand across the table, touching his son's arm. "Matthew, that was..." "True," Emma interrupted, finally finding her voice. It's true, and it's okay for him to say it. He was without a mother for a long time. Matthew shrugged with the disconcerting simplicity of children. But then you came back and stayed. That's what matters. That night, after Matthew slept, Emma cried in Ryan's arms, not from guilt or regret, but from the deep understanding that their story, with all its fractures, could serve a greater purpose. I'll accept the position, she decided. But with one condition, I want to create a support program for single parents too. The men who stay, like you stayed, deserve as much support as the mothers who struggle not to leave. The Pathways Back program was inaugurated the following year, occupying an entire wing of the hospital where Emma and Ryan had reunited. It combined medical, psychological, and social care for families in crisis, especially those affected by postpartum depression, parental abandonment, or serious childhood illnesses. At the opening ceremony, Emma was visibly nervous. Her speech, prepared for weeks, trembled in her hands as she faced the audience of health professionals, authorities, and, more importantly, families benefited by the pilot project. I'd like to begin with a confession, she said, departing from the prepared text. I am the doctor who abandoned her own child. A murmur ran through the auditorium. Ryan, seated in the front row with Matthew, straightened in his chair, concerned. But Emma continued, her voice gaining firmness. I abandoned because fear was greater than love at that moment. Because I didn't know how to ask for help. Because I believed being strong meant never breaking. She took a deep breath. I stayed away for years that won't come back. But I had the rare chance of a new beginning when my son and his father entered the emergency room of this very hospital. Emma looked directly at Matthew, who watched her with a mixture of pride and complicity. This program exists because not all stories have the luck of coincidence that we had. Not all mothers who flee find a way back by chance. Not all fathers who stay receive the support they deserve. Pathways Back doesn't promise perfect endings, but offers bridges where before there were only abysses. At the end of her speech, it was Matthew who first rose to applaud, followed by Ryan, and then the entire audience. The boy ran to the stage and hugged his mother tightly, without caring about protocols or formalities. 5 years after the reunion at the hospital, life had assumed a rhythm that seemed to have existed forever. The house on the outskirts of the city had become a gravitational center for an extended family of friends, colleagues, and patients who occasionally appeared for Sunday dinners. Matthew, now 11 years old, had developed a passionate interest in astronomy. I want to understand the stars that have already died, but continue to illuminate us, he explained to anyone who asked. On an autumn afternoon, while Emma organized medical records Retrigi Continue Edit on an autumn afternoon, while Emma organized medical records on the porch, Ryan came out of the office carrying a large envelope. The publisher's response arrived, he announced. Expression unreadable. Emma immediately stood up. That book, Ryan's first adult novel, inspired by their story, had consumed 2 years of intense work. Previous rejections from other publishers had been painful, although he tried to disguise his disappointment. And? She asked, holding her breath. Ryan slowly opened the envelope, took out some papers, and ran his eyes over the text. His face remained serious for an agonizing moment, before breaking into an uncontainable smile. They accepted it. They'll publish it next spring, Emma shouted with joy, jumping to hug him. They spun together on the porch, laughing like teenagers. Can I read the letter? She asked when they stopped spinning. Better not. Ryan put the papers back in the envelope. There's a part that says the editor cried at the end. It'll inflate my ego too much. Matthew appeared at the door, attracted by the commotion. What happened? Your dad is going to be a published author, Emma announced, still embracing Ryan. The book about us was accepted. The boy frowned, suddenly concerned. But you changed the names, right? I don't want my friends to know I got sick and cried in the hospital. Ryan and Emma exchanged a knowing look before bursting into laughter. The preteen concerns were a constant reminder of how life moved forward, of how stories transformed with time. I changed everything, Ryan assured, ruffling his son's hair. In the story, you're a brave warrior who never gets sick or cries. Matthew rolled his eyes but smiled, satisfied. The book, The Way Back, was launched in a small bookstore downtown. The event, modest but welcoming, gathered friends, family, and some of Emma's loyal patients. Matthew, responsible for the autograph table, assumed his function with the exaggerated seriousness typical of his age. During the Q&A session, a woman at the back of the room timidly raised her hand. The ending. Is it really possible in real life? Or is it just fiction to console the reader? The question provoked a reflective silence. Ryan looked at Emma, who nodded slightly, authorizing him to share the personal truth behind the fiction. The ending isn't a fixed point, he answered carefully. It's a daily process. Some days it seems impossible, other days it seems inevitable. The story ends in the book, but continues in our lives. The woman thanked him with tears in her eyes. Later, during the book signing, she approached again, this time with a sleeping baby in her arms. I'm a patient in Dr. Emma's program, she revealed in a low voice. I thought about leaving many times. Your book
gave me permission to stay and be imperfect. That night, on the way home, the car was unusually silent.
Matthew had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the responsibility of being the son of a newly published author. Emma was driving while Ryan watched the city lights passing by the window. What are you thinking about? She asked, noticing his contemplative expression. About the woman with the baby. About how stories have power. Power to heal or to wound. Yes. And how scary it is to realize that our personal story now belongs a little to others too. Emma smiled, briefly looking at the rearview mirror where she could see their son sleeping. It always did. The difference is that now we know it. 7 years after the reunion at the hospital, Emma received an invitation to speak at an international conference on maternal mental health. The trip to Geneva would be the first time she would be away from Matthew and Ryan for more than 2 days since they had reunited. On the eve of her departure, Emma was restless, repeatedly checking her luggage, ticket and documents. Ryan observed her from the bedroom door, recognizing the signs of anxiety that he himself had felt so many times in the past. You'll come back, he said simply. Emma stopped mid-movement, immediately understanding what he was really saying. She smiled, grateful for the understanding without judgment. I'll come back, always. I know. How can you be so sure? Ryan approached, helping her close the suitcase. Because you're no longer the person who left, and I'm no longer the person who stayed. Matthew entered the room carrying a small, poorly wrapped package, wrapped in notebook paper and lots of tape. I made a travel gift, he announced, handing the package to Emma. But you can only open it when you're on the plane. The next day, already settled in her window seat, Emma carefully opened the package. Inside was a small hand-painted stone. On one side, a simplified drawing of 3 stick figures representing the family. On the other, written in neat handwriting, "Way back." Along with it was a note in Matthew's awkward handwriting, to remind you that there's always a way back home. With love, your son, who's not a baby anymore, so you don't need to worry so much. Emma smiled through the tears that began to form, keeping the stone in her coat pocket, close to her heart. She looked out the window as the plane took off, watching the city shrink until it became just a set of timid lights against the evening sky. Somewhere down there was her family. Not the one she had lost years ago, but the one she had built since then, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. The plane crossed a layer of clouds, emerging into a sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Some perhaps had already been dead for millions of years, their light only now reaching there. Emma touched the stone in her pocket, thinking about how time was not a straight line, but a complex spiral where past and present informed each other. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to rest with the certainty that came not from perfection, but from the daily practice of choosing to stay, choosing to return, choosing to rebuild, even when fear suggested other paths. True courage, she discovered, wasn't in never feeling afraid, but in trembling and moving forward anyway. 10 years after the reunion at the hospital, the family gathered for a special occasion. The Pathways Back program was celebrating its anniversary with a ceremony in the same botanical garden where Emma and Ryan had married. Matthew, now a 16-year-old teenager, was wearing a suit for the first time, uncomfortable, but proud. During the ceremony, Emma was called to receive a commemorative plaque. On the improvised stage, she hesitated before speaking, looking at the audience where dozens of reunited families represented stories of pain, separation, and mainly reunion. A decade ago, I entered an emergency room and found my past carrying my future in his arms, she began, without consulting the prepared notes. It was my ex-partner with our son, whom I hadn't seen since he was a baby. A respectful silence took over the garden. Ryan, in the front row, smiled encouragingly. That day, I had to choose between being just a doctor or being also human, between following protocols or making room for the real story, which always spills outside the medical charts. Emma paused, looking directly at Matthew. I chose the hardest path, the way back. Not to the past, but to a future I almost lost due to fear. She raised the plaque, reflecting the golden light of late afternoon. This program exists because we believe that for many families, the best is yet to come, that separations don't need to be definitive, that single parents deserve support, that suffering mothers deserve understanding without judgment, that children deserve adults who know how to come back, even when leaving seemed the only option. After the ceremony, as guests dispersed along the flowery paths of the garden, Ryan found Emma sitting alone on a stone bench, observing the movement from afar. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting beside her. "About how strange it is to celebrate something that began with so much suffering, like scars that become medals." "Exactly." Emma rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you regret anything?" Ryan considered the question for a moment, observing Matthew in the distance, animatedly talking with a girl his age, not asking why when you started to pull away. "Presuming I knew what was happening inside you, and I regret not finding words for my fear." Transforming silence into distance, Ryan held her hand, tracing with his thumb the wedding ring she had worn for 7 years. "But look what we built from that." Emma smiled, following his gaze to Matthew, who was now laughing at something. The girl had said, "An incredible son who taught us more than we taught him. A program that has already helped hundreds of families. A book that became a movie. And us too," Ryan completed. "Different, but finally whole." Matthew approached, interrupting the moment. "Are you going to stay there all day?" "The party's already starting in the hall." Emma and Ryan exchanged a knowing look before standing up. They walked side by side through the garden, following the hurried steps of their teenage son, who occasionally looked back. Just to confirm they were still there, a habit he had maintained since childhood. "I see you," Emma called, waving. "You can go." Matthew rolled his eyes but smiled before continuing to walk. Ryan put his arm around Emma's waist as they followed the path illuminated by the setting sun. "You know what I like most about our story?" he asked. "What?" "That it's not a fairy tale. It's imperfect, complicated, full of pain and new beginnings, like real life." "Real life drips outside the medical chart," Emma quoted, remembering the words exchanged years ago, in the emergency room, "and forms puddles where we can see ourselves reflected." When they reached the hall, the celebration was in full swing. Soft lights, ambient music, people talking in small groups, families that each in their own way had found their own ways back. Emma observed the scene with the feeling of someone who finally arrived home after a long journey. Not the home made of walls and roof, but that built of daily choices, of kept promises, of fears faced together. The home that exists in the space between people who decided that staying is more important than being perfect. Matthew approached, carrying 3 glasses of juice. "For a toast," he proposed, with the comic seriousness of teenagers. "To the weirdest and coolest family I know." Ryan and Emma laughed, accepting the glasses. "To the family we built," Emma gently corrected. "Not perfect, but present." "To the home we can always return to," Ryan completed. The 3 glasses met in the air with a soft clink, sealing not an ending but a continuous new beginning, the promise renewed each day that, even when the path is lost, there will always be a way back. Not to what was, but to what can be. When the scars began to transform into bridges, they discovered that loving is more about staying than promising. What seemed lost gained new meaning, and real life showed that true love doesn't need to be perfect, just present. A romance about new beginnings, courage, and surrender. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell us in the comments if you believe in second chances.